The rules-based order is doomed. Despite the ritualistic frequency with which the expression rules-based order is used and the almost religious fervor with which this formula is pronounced, its meaning is not clear. What order are we talking about? Where do the rules come from? In the West, there is constant talk of a rules-based order. This formula is used in the media, in official documents, and in speeches by Western leaders. For instance, at the recent G7 summit, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni declared, "We must defend the rules-based order. If we cannot protect Ukraine and it is forced to surrender, then we have no reason to gather here." Despite the ritualistic frequency with which this formula is pronounced and the almost religious fervor with which it is used, its meaning is not clear. What order are we talking about? Where do the rules come from? In Lord of the Flies, one of the best English novels of the 20th century, rules are passionately discussed from the beginning by a boy named Jack. For him, rules are primarily a means to punish those who break them. When he is reminded that he himself is not following the rules, Jack responds that rules do not apply to the strong and promises to establish his own order. Soon, the island sees the rise of the beast cult. The boys kill Simon and Piggy, hunt Ralph, and set the island on fire. In creating his strange apocalyptic novel about children on a deserted island, Golding was far from fantasies and contrived schemes. The image of the strong boy Jack is inspired by the entire tradition of Anglo-Saxon political thought, for which order and rules are key concepts. Hobbes already believed that what happens in society is largely analogous to what happens in the animal world. Man is a wolf to man, there is a war of all against all in the world, and this is the natural state of humanity. People are selfish, driven by fear and greed, and can only be stopped by force. Darwin's hypothesis gave a new impetus to these ideas. There is a brutal struggle for existence in the world, leading to natural selection, which is linked to any development and progress. Herbert Spencer took this doctrine to its logical conclusion: there are weak races and strong ones in the world. By suppressing, pushing back, and killing the weak, the strong lead humanity to order, happiness, and prosperity. The forces working toward the realization of the great scheme of perfect happiness do not take individual cases of suffering into account and destroy that part of humanity that stands in their way, Spencer wrote. Whether it is a man or a savage beast, the obstacle must be removed. Anglo-Saxon culture is filled with enthusiasm for how the strong, the English, eliminate obstacles on the way to the desired happy order. This cult of strength is closely connected with the cult of submission. This is especially noticeable in Kipling. In The Ballad of East and West, the conflict between an Englishman and an Indian ceases after the Englishman issues a series of threats: the English will trample the grain, slaughter the cattle, and burn the huts. At that moment, the Indian recognizes the strength of the Englishman and submits to him, even going so far as to entrust the English with the upbringing of his son. This, according to Kipling, is the key to the peaceful coexistence of East and West. The East submits to the West and allows itself to be educated. Kipling's works are filled with admiration for strength, ruthlessness, and the paralyzing threat of violence and torture. This is how order comes about, in his view. In the novella Stocky & Co., 3 teenagers, given a hint by an adult, torture 2 older students until they break. The older students behaved badly, but now they have learned their lesson, and order is restored. Later, an older Stocky begins to apply the skills he learned in boarding school in British India. Kipling's world is one of continuous struggle for existence. The strongest wins and becomes the lawmaker. This is essentially the story of Mowgli. Mowgli is the new Adam who comes into the world to understand the rules-based order, the law of the jungle. The most important rule in the jungle is the word of the leader, and an act of disobedience brings disaster. When Mowgli breaks the rules, for example, by interacting with the Bandarlog, trouble ensues. Therefore, Mowgli must learn to obey and accept punishment for his misdeeds. First, he obeys his foster wolf parents, his teacher Baloo, and the leader Akela. Later, as an adult, he obeys the white Sahibs Gisborne and Miller. The better he knows the law of the jungle, the more he demands obedience from others. To enforce obedience, he has the red flower and a knife, order is established with fire and sword. Kipling's ideas still influence the Scouting movement. Many politicians who now talk about order and rules once received Scouting lessons of obedience and now eagerly give such lessons to others. They learned from childhood that the world is a brutal struggle, and the strongest wins. Resisting the strong is foolish. The strong win because they are the best. Why stand in the way of the best? It is wrong and unreasonable. One should learn from the best. If someone does not understand this, they must be punished. The cult of strength and the cult of submission are remarkable phenomena in Anglo-Saxon culture. Kipling glorifies the English soldier, strength, and the mule, the submissive natural element. In his poems, the Anglo-Saxon seems to work alongside nature, finishing what it did not, directing, shaping, sorting, and eliminating the wrong. The Anglo-Saxon possesses an almost divine function. He comes into matter to give it structure. The world is a workshop, the writer believes, and the English are its workers. Thus, the Platonic canon, goodness, truth, and beauty with the highest idea of good, is replaced. For the Anglo-Saxons, goodness, truth, and beauty are united not by good, but by strength. This, presumably, leads to their fatal divergence from other nations. The weak and the defeated have no right to their opinion, the Anglo-Saxons think. If the weak call for agreements to be respected, they are ridiculous. If they call for justice, they are foolish. If they persistently insist on their own, they are simply hooligans and need a lesson in submission. Strength is the answer to all questions. We have the Maxim gun, and you do not. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov once subtly noted that in the Russian language, the words for law and rule share the same root, and thus a just rule for us is inseparable from the law. In English, it's different. Law and rule are distinct. Rule is not connected to law, it is the privilege of the strong, those who rule. Lavrov's observation is confirmed by our opponents, who occasionally slip and reveal what the order they defend truly is. Last year, Pentagon Chief Lloyd Austin stated, "I know that not everyone gets excited by this phrase. But the rules-based international order is central to our long-term security. It is the framework of international institutions, alliances, laws, and norms established under America's leadership. The world is not self-sustaining. Order does not maintain itself. And security does not arise spontaneously. A world built under American leadership can only be preserved through American leadership. So, the rules-based order is merely a structure created under America's leadership. In other words, it's just a clever euphemism, another name for American hegemony in a unipolar world. This formula masks the true goals of the USA, but it is ultimately a failure. What should ordinary people around the world feel when they are forced into a rules-based order? Read, American rules. Where is the excitement, the promise of happiness, the intellectual delight, the spiritual ecstasy? Where are the tears of joy and tenderness? If the West previously presented itself as a servant of progress, civilization, and freedom, it made sense. But why should hearts around the world beat faster at the words about order, rules, punishments, the right of the strong, and discipline? What is the appeal of being forced to obey someone else's order? Kipling admired beatings and wrote tenderly that some people find it very difficult to explain how a boy of 17 or 18 can beat another boy, only a year younger, with an ash cane and then go for a walk with him. 100 years have passed, but it is still difficult for most people to explain this. Submit to the stronger one, the one who can beat you. For an Anglo-Saxon who went through the Scouting movement, this sounds convincing, but for others, it is unbearable vulgarity. The thought that Russia should submit to America because it, supposedly, won the Cold War is repulsive to Russians. Only the weak and broken can agree with such theses. Look at the list of Western allies. For everyone else, talk of the beneficent impact of strength is revolting. What other jungle laws are there, Anglo-Saxons, what are you talking about? Strength cannot be the source of good, truth, and beauty. It is quite the opposite. Your right of the strong will inevitably turn into the cult of the beast.